when the PTA president stood up at the packed school meeting and said, "Jessica Martinez is a negligent mother who puts her work before her child's well-being." I felt the room collapse around me. 40 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. The principal nodded gravely. My heart stopped beating. I wanted to disappear into the floor, but I was trapped in that plastic chair with nowhere to hide. Then, Mrs. Rodriguez, my daughter's third-grade teacher, slowly stood up from the back of the room. She had something to say that would change everything, something that would expose the truth about what really happened after class that day. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My name is Jessica Martinez, and I'm 34 years old. I live in Riverside Hills, a suburb outside Phoenix where everyone knows everyone's business, and gossip travels faster than wildfire in August. I'm a single mother to my 8-year-old daughter, Isabella, who is the brightest light in my world. For the past 2 years, I've been working as a nurse at Desert Valley Medical Center, pulling 12-hour shifts that often stretch into 14 or 15 hours when emergencies arise. It's demanding work, but it pays well enough to give Isabella the life she deserves. Isabella is everything to me. She has her father's dark curls but my stubborn streak and fierce independence. She's brilliant, curious, and has this incredible ability to see the good in everyone around her. When she was 5, her father Carlos walked out on us without warning, leaving behind only a note saying he wasn't ready to be a father. That day broke something inside me, but it also ignited a determination I didn't know I possessed. I promised myself and Isabella that we would not just survive, we would thrive. The transition to single motherhood wasn't easy. I had to leave my comfortable job at a small clinic to take the higher-paying position at the hospital. The hours were brutal, but the salary allowed me to rent a decent 2-bedroom apartment in a good school district. Isabella deserved stability, quality education, and opportunities I never had growing up in East Phoenix where resources were scarce and dreams often died young. Every morning, I wake up at 5 to prepare Isabella's breakfast and pack her lunch, with little notes of encouragement. I walk her to the bus stop, kiss her forehead, and tell her to have the best day possible. When I work day shifts, I'm home by 7:30 in the evening, just in time for dinner, homework help, and bedtime stories. When I work nights, my neighbor Maria Gonzalez, a retired teacher and the kindest woman I've ever known, watches Isabella. Maria has become like a grandmother to us, and Isabella adores her. The problem started about 3 months ago when I began picking up extra shifts to save money for Isabella's birthday party. She had been talking about wanting a princess-themed celebration for months, and I was determined to make it happen. The overtime meant longer hours at the hospital, but it also meant I could afford the decorations, cake, and small gifts for her friends that would make her day special. During this period, I occasionally arrived a few minutes late to pick Isabella up from after-school care. The program officially ended at 6, but they had a grace period until 6:15 for working parents. I never arrived later than 6:10, and I always called ahead if I was running behind due to a medical emergency at the hospital. Isabella never seemed bothered by the wait. She would use the extra time to finish homework or help the staff clean up, something that Mrs. Rodriguez, who supervised the aftercare program, seemed to appreciate. But apparently, some of the other parents noticed my occasional tardiness. Riverside Hills Elementary has a very active parent community, which can be wonderful for organizing events and supporting teachers, but it can also become a breeding ground for judgment and gossip. These parents, led by Sandra Wellington, the PTA president, began keeping track of every time I was a few minutes late. They started whispering about the working mother who can't manage her schedule. Sandra Wellington is everything I'm not. She's married to a successful real estate developer, drives a pristine white SUV, and has perfectly styled blonde hair that never seems to move even in Phoenix's notorious dust storms. She doesn't work outside the home, which gives her the luxury of being available for every school event, volunteer opportunity, and PTA meeting. She's the type of mother who brings elaborate homemade treats to class parties and organizes color-coordinated carpools. In many ways, she's a wonderful asset to the school community, but she also has very rigid ideas about what makes a good mother. I first sensed trouble during a chance encounter at the grocery store. I was rushing through the aisles, after a particularly exhausting shift, still wearing my scrubs and grabbing ingredients for a quick dinner. Isabella was with me, chattering excitedly about a science project while helping me navigate the crowded store. Sandra appeared at the end of our aisle with her perfectly organized cart and gave me a look that made my skin crawl. "Jessica," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you look tired. Are you taking care of yourself? It's so important for mothers to maintain their health, for the children's sake." I forced a polite smile and explained that I had just finished a long shift at the hospital. It's demanding work, but I love being able to help people, and it provides well for Isabella. Sandra's expression shifted slightly. "Oh, I'm sure it does. It must be challenging, though, balancing such demanding work with motherhood. I hope Isabella isn't suffering from the adjustments." The way she said adjustments made it clear she had opinions about my parenting choices. Isabella, who had been listening to our conversation, stepped closer to me and took my hand. Even at 8 years old, she could sense the tension. "My mom is the best nurse in the whole hospital," Isabella said proudly. "She saves people's lives every day, and she still makes me pancakes shaped like butterflies on Sundays." Sandra's smile became even more forced. "How sweet. Well, I should let you get home. I'm sure you both have a busy evening ahead." As we walked away, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. There was something in Sandra's tone and body language that suggested our conversation was far from over. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself I was being paranoid. But over the next few weeks, I began noticing subtle changes in how some of the other parents interacted with me. The whispers started small. I would walk Isabella to school and notice small groups of mothers who would stop talking when I approached, only to resume their conversations once I passed. During pickup, I caught fragments of discussions about working mothers and priorities that seemed directed at me. The looks became more frequent and more pointed. Isabella began asking questions I didn't know how to answer. "Mommy, why don't the other moms talk to you like they talk to each other?" She asked one evening while I was helping her with math homework. I chose my words carefully. "Sometimes adults have different opinions about things, sweetheart. It doesn't mean anything is wrong. What matters is that we love each other, and we're doing our best." She nodded, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. Children are remarkably perceptive, and Isabella was picking up on the social dynamics even if she couldn't fully understand them. The situation escalated when Isabella came home from school one day looking unusually quiet. She sat at our kitchen table, pushing her after-school snack around her plate without eating, which was completely unlike her. Isabella has always had a healthy appetite and typically devours whatever I put in front of her. "What's wrong, mija?" I asked, using the Spanish endearment my grandmother had used with me. She looked up with tears forming in her dark eyes. "Tommy Morrison's mom said something to his dad about you when they were picking him up from soccer practice. Tommy told me about it at recess." My heart sank. "What did she say, baby?" "She said you don't care enough about me to come to school, events, and that you're always late because work is more important to you than I am." The tears spilled over as she spoke. "But that's not true, is it, Mommy? You do care about me, right?" I immediately pulled her into my arms, holding her tight as she cried against my shoulder. "Isabella, listen to me very carefully. You are the most important thing in my entire world. Everything I do, every single day, is for you. I work hard because I love you, not because work is more important than you. Some people don't understand that sometimes we have to make difficult choices, but that doesn't mean our love is any less. I spent the rest of the evening reassuring her, but inside, I was furious. It was one thing for these women to judge me, but involving children and making Isabella question my love for her crossed a line I couldn't ignore. The next day, I decided to address the situation directly. I arrived at school pickup 15 minutes early and approached Sandra Wellington, who was holding court with her usual group of followers near the flagpole. "Sandra, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and professional. She looked surprised but agreed. We walked a few steps away from the group, and I got straight to the point. "I understand there have been some discussions about my parenting, and I want to clear the air. I work hard to provide for my daughter, and while I occasionally run a few minutes late due to medical emergencies at the hospital, I have never failed to pick Isabella up or missed any of her important needs." Sandra's demeanor shifted from surprise to defensiveness. "Jessica, I think you're being a bit sensitive. We're all just concerned about the children's well-being. When parents are consistently late, it sets a poor example and can be disruptive to the aftercare program." "Consistently late?" I challenged. "I've been late exactly 4 times in the past 2 months, never more than 10 minutes, and always due to genuine emergencies at work. I call ahead every time, and Isabella is never unsupervised." Sandra's eyes hardened. "It's not just about being late, Jessica. It's about priorities. Children need stability and consistency. When mothers put their careers ahead of their children's needs, it sends a message about what really matters." I felt my temper flaring but forced myself to remain calm. My career allows me to provide Isabella with a safe home, good food, healthcare, and educational opportunities. Working hard doesn't make me a bad mother. "No one said you were a bad mother," Sandra replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "We're simply concerned about whether Isabella is getting the attention and stability she needs during this crucial developmental period." The conversation ended with both of us frustrated and nothing resolved. If anything, I had the distinct feeling that I had made things worse by confronting her directly. Sandra Wellington was not used to being challenged, and I suspected my directness had only fueled her determination to prove her point about my inadequacy as a mother. Over the following weeks, the situation continued to deteriorate. I began receiving passive-aggressive emails about school events I had missed due to work conflicts, always CC'd to multiple other parents, as if to highlight my absence. There were subtle comments during drop-off about how some children seemed tired or stressed, clearly directed at Isabella. The worst part was watching my confident, happy daughter begin to second-guess herself and withdraw from her usual social interactions. Mrs. Rodriguez, Isabella's teacher, began sending me more frequent updates about Isabella's behavior and academic performance. At first, I was grateful for the communication, but I started to wonder if this increased attention was related to the complaints from other parents. Was she being asked to monitor Isabella more closely because of questions about my parenting? The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in late October. I had just finished a particularly challenging shift in the emergency room, where we had treated multiple trauma cases from a serious car accident. I was emotionally and physically drained, running on empty after 14 straight hours of high-stress medical care. When I arrived at aftercare to pick up Isabella, I was 12 minutes late, the latest I had ever been. Isabella was sitting alone at a table, working on homework while the staff cleaned up around her. She looked up when she saw me, and instead of her usual bright smile, I saw something that broke my heart: resignation. My 8-year-old daughter had learned to expect disappointment, and that realization hit me like a physical blow. "I'm so sorry, Mija," I said as I helped her gather her belongings. "We had multiple emergencies at the hospital, and I couldn't leave until the patients were stable." She nodded quietly, not meeting my eyes. "It's okay, Mommy." Mrs. Rodriguez stayed with me, and I finished all my homework. As we walked to the car, I noticed Sandra Wellington's white SUV still in the parking lot. Through the windshield, I could see her talking animatedly on her phone, occasionally gesturing in our direction. Something told me that phone call wasn't good news for us. That night, after Isabella was asleep, I received an email that made my blood run cold. It was from Sandra, sent to the entire PTA mailing list, with the subject line, "Concerns about student welfare and aftercare policies." The email was carefully worded to avoid direct accusations, but its intent was unmistakable. Sandra wrote about the importance of punctuality and reliability in demonstrating respect for school staff and other families. She discussed how chronic lateness could indicate deeper issues with time management and priorities that might affect a child's home environment. She concluded by suggesting that the PTA should consider recommending stricter enforcement of pickup times and potentially require parents who were frequently late to find alternative childcare arrangements. While my name was never mentioned, every parent reading that email would know exactly who she was talking about. I felt sick to my stomach as I imagined dozens of families discussing my supposed inadequacies over their dinner tables. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in over a year. I needed time to think, to figure out how to protect Isabella from this escalating situation. I dropped her off at school and spent the day researching my options. Could Sandra actually force me to find alternative aftercare? Did I have any recourse against what felt like harassment? How could I defend myself against accusations that were technically true but completely lacking in context? Isabella came home that day more withdrawn than ever. During dinner, she barely touched her favorite meal of chicken quesadillas and rice. When I asked about her day, she shrugged and said it was fine, but I could see the weight she was carrying. "Baby, did something happen at school today?" I pressed gently. She looked up at me with eyes that seemed too old for her 8 years. Some of the other kids were talking about their moms, and Sophia asked me why my mom is always working and never comes to school stuff like their moms do. My heart shattered. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that you help sick people get better, and that's really important work. But then she said her mom told her that good moms make time for school no matter what their jobs are." Isabella's voice broke slightly. "Am I wrong, Mommy? Are you not a good mom because you work so much?" I knelt beside her chair and took her small hands in mine. "Isabella Marie Martinez, you listen to me. I am a good mother, and you are the most loved little girl in the entire world. Different families have different situations, and what works for one family might not work for another. I work hard because I love you, not because I don't love you. Every single decision I make is about giving you the best life possible." She nodded, but I could see the doubt that had been planted by weeks of subtle and not-so-subtle criticism from the parent community. That night, as I tucked her into bed, I made a decision. I couldn't let this continue. Isabella's emotional well-being was more important than my pride or my desire to avoid confrontation. The next day, I requested a meeting with Principal Davis. Margaret Davis had been the principal at Riverside Hills Elementary for over 15 years, and she had a reputation for being fair and student-focused. I hoped she would listen to my concerns and help find a resolution that wouldn't further damage Isabella's school experience. Principal Davis was professional and sympathetic during our meeting. She listened as I explained the situation with Sandra Wellington and the other parents, the emails, the whispered comments, and most importantly, the impact it was having on Isabella. "Mrs. Martinez," she said thoughtfully, "I want you to know that your punctuality has never been flagged as a serious concern by our aftercare staff. Mrs. Rodriguez has mentioned that you occasionally run a few minutes late, but she's also noted that you always call ahead and that Isabella is well-behaved and prepared during aftercare time." This was somewhat reassuring, but I pressed further. "Principal Davis, I'm worried that this situation is affecting Isabella's social relationships and her emotional well-being. She's starting to question whether I'm a good mother, and that's not acceptable to me." Principal Davis nodded understandingly. I can see why you're concerned. Let me speak with Mrs. Rodriguez about her observations, and perhaps we can arrange a broader conversation with the parent community about supporting all types of families in our school. I left the meeting feeling cautiously optimistic, but that optimism was short-lived. 2 days later, I received a call from Sandra Wellington herself. Jessica, I hope you don't mind me calling directly, she began, though her tone suggested she didn't particularly care if I minded. I heard you met with Principal Davis about some concerns. I wanted to reach out personally to see if we could resolve this situation amicably. What situation exactly? I asked, though I knew perfectly well what she meant. Well, there's been some discussion among parents about the aftercare program and whether current policies are serving all of our children's needs effectively. Some parents feel that when pickup schedules aren't consistently followed, it creates additional work for staff and sets a poor example for the children. I took a deep breath before responding. Sandra, I think there's been a misunderstanding about my situation. I work in emergency medicine, which means my schedule can be unpredictable due to life and death situations. I've never been more than 15 minutes late. I always call ahead, and Isabella is never unsupervised or neglected. I'm sure you believe you're doing your best, Sandra replied in a tone that made it clear she thought my best wasn't good enough. But the reality is that other parents have had to adjust their schedules and make sacrifices to accommodate school policies. It seems unfair that some parents get special treatment while others are expected to strictly adhere to the rules. Special treatment? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. I'm talking about occasional delays due to medical emergencies, not a pattern of irresponsibility. Jessica, I think we have different perspectives on what constitutes appropriate priorities for a mother. Perhaps it would be better for everyone if you found aftercare arrangements that better accommodate your unpredictable work schedule. The conversation ended with both of us more entrenched in our positions than before. Sandra had essentially told me that I wasn't welcome in the school's aftercare program, and I was furious at her presumption and judgmental attitude. That evening, Isabella came home with an invitation to Sophia Chen's birthday party. It was the first social invitation she had received in weeks, and I could see how excited she was about it. But as I read the details, my heart sank. The party was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, exactly when I was supposed to work a shift at the hospital. I immediately started making phone calls to see if I could switch shifts with another nurse, but everyone else was already committed to their scheduled hours. I faced an impossible choice: disappoint my daughter by missing one of her few remaining social opportunities, or call in sick to work and risk my job security. After much internal debate, I decided to call in sick. Isabella's social relationships had already suffered enough from this situation, and I couldn't bear to see her miss out on something that might help her reconnect with her classmates. But as I made the call to my supervisor, I felt the weight of Sandra Wellington's criticisms. Was I being irresponsible? Was I setting a poor example for Isabella by lying about being sick? The party was a success from Isabella's perspective. She played games, ate cake, and laughed with her friends in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. But I noticed how the other mothers interacted with me. The conversations were polite but distant, and I caught several meaningful looks exchanged when they thought I wasn't paying attention. As we drove home, Isabella chatted excitedly about the party, but then she asked a question that made my stomach drop. Mommy, why didn't you tell the other moms about your work at the hospital? Sophia's mom was asking about what you do, and you just said you work in healthcare. I realized I had been so focused on avoiding conflict that I had started downplaying my career, almost as if I was ashamed of the work that I was actually proud of. I guess I didn't want to make it seem like I was bragging, sweetheart. But you should be proud of your job, Isabella said matter-of-factly. You help people feel better when they're hurt or sick. That's important. Out of the mouths of babes, my 8-year-old daughter understood something that the adult parent community seemed to have forgotten. that different types of work have different demands, and that providing for your family is an act of love, not neglect. The situation reached its crescendo the following week when Sandra Wellington called for a special PTA meeting to discuss policies and procedures that affect the entire school community. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening, and the agenda, distributed via email, included items like aftercare pickup policies, volunteer participation expectations, and supporting family engagement in education. I knew this meeting was essentially a public trial of my parenting, disguised as a policy discussion. Every item on the agenda seemed designed to highlight my supposed shortcomings as a mother and community member. I spent the days leading up to the meeting agonizing over whether to attend. Part of me wanted to avoid the public humiliation, but another part of me knew that staying away would be seen as an admission of guilt. The night before the meeting, I sat Isabella down for a serious conversation. Tomorrow evening, there's going to be a meeting at your school where some of the parents will be discussing rules and policies. Some of these parents have questions about my work schedule and how it affects our family. I want you to know that no matter what happens, you are loved, you are important, and I am proud to be your mother. Isabella looked at me with a maturity that broke my heart. Are they going to say mean things about you, Mommy? I chose honesty over false reassurance. They might say things that aren't very nice, but they're saying them because they don't understand our situation. Sometimes adults make mistakes and judge people without knowing the whole story. Will Mrs. Rodriguez be there? Isabella asked. I think so, sweetheart. Why? Because she knows you're a good mom. She told me so. This simple statement gave me more courage than anything else could have. If Mrs. Rodriguez, who spent more time with Isabella than any other adult besides me, believed I was a good mother, then maybe I had an ally in this fight. The next evening, I dressed carefully for the meeting. I chose professional but approachable attire, a navy blue blazer, gray slacks, and comfortable flats. I wanted to look competent and responsible, someone who deserved respect rather than judgment. I arrived at the school 15 minutes early, hoping to find a seat where I wouldn't be the center of attention. The meeting was held in the school library, with rows of folding chairs arranged to face a small table where Sandra Wellington and the other PTA officers sat. About 40 parents were in attendance, which was unusually high for a PTA meeting. Word had clearly spread about the evening's agenda. I chose a seat in the middle of the room, close enough to participate if necessary, but not so prominent that I would draw immediate attention. As other parents filed in, I received a mixture of sympathetic smiles, curious glances, and a few openly hostile stares. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, like the moments before a thunderstorm. Sandra called the meeting to order with her usual efficiency, running through routine business items with brisk professionalism. But I could sense the underlying tension in the room as everyone waited for the main event. The discussion of policies that everyone knew were really about me. When Sandra reached the agenda item about aftercare policies, the energy in the room shifted noticeably. She began with what sounded like a reasonable presentation about the importance of consistent pickup times and respect for staff schedules. But as she continued, her comments became increasingly pointed and personal, even without mentioning my name. When parents consistently fail to adhere to established pickup times, she said, looking directly at me, it creates additional burden for our dedicated staff members and sends a message to our children that rules are optional. We must consider whether our current policies adequately protect both our staff and our students from the disruption caused by chronic unreliability. Several parents nodded in agreement, and I felt the weight of their collective judgment. I wanted to defend myself, to explain about the medical emergencies and the impossible choices I faced every day, but I also knew that anything I said would likely be twisted against me. The discussion continued with various parents sharing their perspectives on punctuality, reliability, and family priorities. Each comment felt like another stone thrown at my character, building a case for my inadequacy as a mother and community member. I sat quietly, feeling smaller and more isolated with each passing minute. Then Sandra delivered what felt like the final blow. I think we need to seriously consider whether parents who cannot consistently meet basic pickup requirements should be allowed to continue using the aftercare program. Perhaps it's time to implement stricter policies with clear consequences for repeated violations. The room fell silent as the implications of her statement sank in. She was essentially proposing that I be banned from the aftercare program, which would make it impossible for me to continue working at the hospital. It was a calculated attack designed to force me to choose between my career and my daughter's education in this school district. I felt tears threatening to spill over as I realized how completely I had been outmaneuvered. Sandra had successfully painted me as a selfish, irresponsible mother who put her career ahead of her child's well-being. The other parents were nodding in agreement with her assessment, and I had no way to defend myself without seeming defensive and confirming their worst assumptions about me. That's when Mrs. Rodriguez stood up from her seat in the back of the room. Mrs. Rodriguez had been Isabella's teacher for only 3 months, but in that short time, she had become more than an educator to my daughter. She had become a mentor, a confidant, and what I was about to discover, a fierce advocate. Elena Rodriguez was in her 15th year of teaching 3rd grade at Riverside Hills Elementary, and her classroom was known throughout the school as a place where every child felt valued and understood. She had graying hair that she wore in a neat bun, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a gentle but firm demeanor that commanded respect from both students and parents. What I didn't know until that pivotal moment in the library was that Mrs. Rodriguez had been quietly documenting everything she observed about Isabella and our family situation. While Sandra Wellington and her allies were building their case against my parenting based on pickup times and missed volunteer opportunities, Mrs. Rodriguez had been witnessing something entirely different, the daily reality of a child who was thriving despite the challenges her family faced. As Mrs. Rodriguez stood up in that crowded library, the room fell completely silent. Even Sandra Wellington seemed surprised by the interruption, her carefully orchestrated presentation suddenly derailed by an unexpected voice. Mrs. Rodriguez had never been one to seek attention or insert herself into parent politics, which made her decision to speak up all the more powerful. "Excuse me," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice calm but carrying clearly through the silent room. "I've been listening to this discussion about Isabella Martinez and her mother's supposed shortcomings, and I feel compelled to share some observations that I believe are relevant to this conversation." Sandra's face flushed slightly. "Mrs. Rodriguez, we weren't discussing any specific family. With respect, Mrs. Wellington, we all know exactly who this meeting is about," Mrs. Rodriguez interrupted gently but firmly. "And since Isabella Martinez is my student, and since I've had the privilege of observing both Isabella and her mother's dedication over the past several months, I think it's important that this community hears the full story before making judgments that could profoundly impact a child's life." My heart was pounding as I realized that Mrs. Rodriguez was about to either defend me or deliver the final blow to my reputation. I had no idea what she had observed or what conclusions she had drawn about my parenting. All I could do was sit there and wait to discover my fate. Mrs. Rodriguez walked slowly to the front of the room, her presence commanding attention in a way that was completely different from Sandra's aggressive leadership style. Where Sandra dominated through force of personality and social position, Mrs. Rodriguez commanded respect through quiet authority and genuine concern for children's well-being. "I'd like to tell you about Isabella Martinez," she began, her eyes scanning the room before settling on me with a warm, reassuring smile. "Isabella arrives at school every morning with a healthy breakfast in her stomach, clean clothes on her back, and completed homework in her backpack. She's never once come to school hungry, dirty, or unprepared. Her lunch is always nutritious, and often includes little notes of encouragement from her mother, notes that Isabella treasures and sometimes shares with classmates who are having difficult days. She paused, letting this information sink in before continuing. Isabella is one of the most emotionally intelligent children I've taught in my 15 years in this classroom. She shows exceptional empathy for her classmates, often comforting children who are upset, and including those who might otherwise be left out. When Tommy Morrison was struggling with his parents' divorce last month, Isabella was the first child to invite him to sit with her at lunch and include him in playground activities. I felt tears starting to form as I listened to Mrs. Rodriguez describe my daughter in ways that filled me with pride. But I also wondered where this was leading and whether it would ultimately help or hurt my situation. Isabella talks about her mother constantly, Mrs. Rodriguez continued, and always with enormous pride and love. She tells her classmates about how her mommy saves people's lives at the hospital, how she works hard to make sure Isabella has everything she needs, and how they spend their time together reading books, cooking meals, and exploring the desert trails near their home. Several parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats, perhaps beginning to realize that their assumptions about my parenting might have been incorrect. Mrs. Rodriguez's voice grew stronger as she continued. But what I want to share with you, most importantly, is what I've observed during our aftercare program, because that seems to be the focus of tonight's concerns about pickup times and parental reliability. Sandra Wellington looked increasingly uncomfortable as Mrs. Rodriguez prepared to address the specific accusations that had led to this meeting. Isabella's mother has been late to pick up exactly 7 times since the beginning of the school year, Mrs. Rodriguez said, pulling out a small notebook from her jacket pocket. I keep detailed records of all aftercare activities, including pickup times, because it's part of my responsibility to ensure student safety and program effectiveness. She opened the notebook and began reading specific dates and circumstances. September 15th. Jessica Martinez called at 5:45 to explain that she was delayed due to a multi-car accident that brought several critical patients to the emergency room. She arrived at 6:12 and stayed to help Isabella clean up her art project before leaving. September 28th. Mrs. Martinez was delayed because she was assisting with emergency surgery on a child who had been brought in after falling from playground equipment. She called ahead, arrived at 6:08, and brought Isabella a small toy she had picked up at the hospital gift shop to apologize for the delay. As Mrs. Rodriguez continued reading through her documented observations, a different picture began to emerge. Each late pickup had been preceded by a phone call explaining genuine emergency circumstances. Each time, I had arrived apologetic but focused on Isabella's needs. And according to Mrs. Rodriguez's notes, Isabella had never seemed distressed or abandoned during these brief delays. What I've observed, Mrs. Rodriguez said, closing her notebook and looking directly at Sandra Wellington, is a mother who is juggling extraordinary responsibilities with grace and dedication. Jessica Martinez works in a profession where people's lives literally depend on her availability and expertise. She cannot simply walk away from a cardiac arrest or a trauma case because it's 6 o'clock and she needs to pick up her daughter. But in my experience, she has handled these impossible situations with remarkable consideration for both her professional obligations and her daughter's needs. The room was completely silent now, and I could see some parents beginning to look uncomfortable about the assumptions they had made about my character and priorities. But Mrs. Rodriguez wasn't finished. I want to share something else that I think speaks directly to the kind of mother Jessica Martinez is and the kind of child she's raising. 3 weeks ago, we had an incident during aftercare that I believe illustrates the values that Isabella has learned at home. She walked closer to where I was sitting, her expression growing more emotional as she prepared to share whatever story was coming next. We have a student in our aftercare program, I won't mention names to protect privacy, who comes from a family facing significant financial difficulties. This child often arrives at aftercare hungry because there isn't enough food at home for adequate meals. The child was too embarrassed to ask for help, but Isabella noticed that her classmate wasn't eating the provided snack and seemed listless during activities. Mrs. Rodriguez's voice became softer, more intimate, as if she were sharing a precious secret. Without any prompting from adults, Isabella began sharing her own after-school snacks with this classmate. Not just once or twice, but every single day. She would quietly divide whatever her mother had packed for her and make sure her friend had enough to eat. Several parents were now wiping their eyes, and even Sandra Wellington seemed to be struggling with her composure. When I noticed what was happening and gently asked Isabella about it, she said something that I will never forget. She told me, "My mommy always says that if we have enough to share, we should share it, because you never know when someone might need help. Maybe someday we'll need help too, and someone will be kind to us." The emotional impact of this story was palpable. Throughout the room, parents who had been ready to condemn me for occasional tardiness were now hearing about the values I had instilled in my daughter and the compassionate, generous child I was raising. Mrs. Rodriguez continued, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "This is the child that Jessica Martinez is raising while working 12 to 14-hour shifts to provide for her family. This is the result of the parenting that some of you have questioned tonight. Isabella Martinez is kind, responsible, academically, successful, emotionally mature, and deeply loved. If this is what neglectful parenting produces, then perhaps we need to reconsider our definitions of good motherhood." She turned to address Sandra Wellington directly. "Mrs. Wellington, you've suggested that parents who cannot meet rigid pickup schedules should be excluded from aftercare services. I want you to consider what that would mean for Isabella and families like hers. Jessica Martinez is not late because she's getting her nails done or having coffee with friends. She's late because she's literally saving lives. Are we really prepared to penalize a child because her mother's profession sometimes requires her to put patient care ahead of convenience?" The challenge in Mrs. Rodriguez's voice was unmistakable, and Sandra Wellington seemed to shrink under the weight of it. "Furthermore," Mrs. Rodriguez continued, "I want to address the broader implications of what's been proposed here tonight. Are we saying that only parents with flexible jobs and comfortable financial situations are welcome in our school community? Are we suggesting that children of single mothers, healthcare workers, police officers, firefighters, and other essential service providers don't deserve the same support and understanding as children from more traditional family structures?" The questions hung in the air like accusations, forcing everyone in the room to confront the underlying prejudices that had fueled this entire controversy. Mrs. Rodriguez walked back toward her original seat, but stopped to address the room. "One final time. I've been teaching for 15 years, and I've seen all kinds of families and parenting styles. I've seen wealthy parents who are emotionally absent from their children's lives, and I've seen struggling single parents who move heaven and earth to support their kids. I've seen stay-at-home mothers whose children are anxious and insecure, and I've seen working mothers whose children are confident and well-adjusted." She paused, looking around the room at the faces of parents who were beginning to question their own assumptions and judgments. What determines a child's success and happiness isn't whether their mother volunteers for every field trip or arrives for pickup at exactly 6 o'clock. It's whether that child feels loved, supported, and valued. It's whether they're being taught important life lessons about kindness, responsibility, and perseverance. It's whether they're growing up in an environment where they feel secure enough to be compassionate toward others. Mrs. Rodriguez's voice became more passionate as she built toward her conclusion. "Isabella Martinez has all of these things. She is thriving academically, socially, and emotionally. She is a leader in kindness and inclusion among her peers. She is proud of her mother and secure in her mother's love. If we're going to judge Jessica Martinez's parenting, let's judge it based on the actual results, the remarkable young girl she's raising." The room erupted in spontaneous applause, starting with a few parents and quickly spreading throughout the library. I was crying openly now, overwhelmed by gratitude for Mrs. Rodriguez's defense and by pride in the daughter I had somehow managed to raise well despite all the challenges we faced. But Mrs. Rodriguez held up her hand to quiet the applause because she wasn't finished yet. "There's something else I want to share," she said, her voice taking on a different tone. Something that I think speaks to Jessica Martinez's character, in a way that goes beyond her role as Isabella's mother. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. 2 weeks ago, I received this note from Jessica. I'd like to read it to you with her permission. She looked at me questioningly, and I nodded, having no idea what note she was referring to, but trusting her judgment completely. Mrs. Rodriguez unfolded the paper and began to read. Dear Mrs. Rodriguez, I wanted to thank you for the extra attention you've been giving Isabella during aftercare. I know that staying late with children whose parents are delayed isn't technically part of your job description, but your kindness and patience mean more to our family than you could possibly know. I also wanted to let you know that I've noticed you mentioned during pickup conversations that your own mother has been struggling with health issues. As someone who works in healthcare, I wanted to offer my assistance in any way that might be helpful. If you ever need someone to explain medical procedures, help navigate insurance questions, or just provide a professional perspective on treatment options, please don't hesitate to call me. We all need support sometimes, and I'd be honored to help however I can. Mrs. Rodriguez's voice cracked slightly as she finished reading. This note came with Jessica's personal phone number and an offer to help my family navigate my mother's cancer treatment completely free of charge. This is the woman who some of you have characterized as selfish and self-centered. The impact of this revelation was profound. Here was concrete evidence that not only was I not the negligent, career-obsessed mother I had been portrayed as, but I was actually someone who went out of my way to support others in my community, even while facing my own challenges. Mrs. Rodriguez folded the note carefully and returned it to her pocket. Jessica Martinez has never asked for special treatment or made excuses for her situation. She has quietly, gracefully managed the impossible balance between a demanding career that serves our entire community and devoted motherhood. She has raised a daughter who embodies the best values of kindness, generosity, and resilience. And she has extended support and care to other families, including mine, without being asked and without expecting anything in return. She turned to look directly at Sandra Wellington, her expression compassionate but firm. Mrs. Wellington, I understand your desire to maintain standards and ensure that school policies are followed consistently. These are admirable goals that serve our community well. But I would ask you to consider whether the standards we're applying are fair, compassionate, and inclusive of the diverse family situations represented in our school. Sandra Wellington looked uncomfortable and uncertain, clearly not expecting to have her carefully constructed case dismantled so thoroughly and publicly. Mrs. Rodriguez continued, I would also ask all of you to consider what kind of community we want to create for our children. Do we want a community where families are supported through challenges, or where they're judged and excluded when their circumstances don't match our expectations? Do we want our children to learn that success comes in many forms, or that only one type of family structure is acceptable? She gestured toward me, and I felt the attention of the entire room focused on my tear-streaked face. Jessica Martinez represents something that I think we should celebrate rather than condemn. She represents resilience, dedication, and the courage to do whatever it takes to provide for her family while also serving our broader community through her medical work. Isabella Martinez represents the next generation of leaders, children, who have learned empathy and strength from watching their parents navigate real-world challenges with grace and integrity. The room was completely silent as Mrs. Rodriguez prepared to conclude her remarkable defense of my family. I would like to propose an alternative to the exclusionary policies suggested earlier tonight, she said, her voice gaining strength and authority. Instead of penalizing families whose work demands create occasional scheduling conflicts, why don't we explore ways to better support all types of families in our community? Why don't we celebrate the diverse contributions that different parents bring to our school, whether that's volunteering time, professional expertise, or simply raising children who make our classroom communities stronger and more compassionate? Mrs. Rodriguez looked around the room, making eye contact with parents who had been ready to vote me out of the aftercare program just minutes earlier. I challenge each of you to think about a time when you needed flexibility, understanding, or support from your community. Think about a moment when your job, your health, your family circumstances, or your personal challenges made it difficult to meet every expectation perfectly. Now imagine if, instead of receiving compassion and assistance, you were judged, criticized, and excluded from the very community support systems you needed most. The power of this challenge was evident in the faces around the room. Parents were clearly reflecting on their own experiences of needing grace and understanding from others. This is what we have the opportunity to do for the Martinez family and for any other families who might face similar challenges in the future, Mrs. Rodriguez concluded. We can choose to be a community that lifts each other up rather than tearing each other down. We can choose to recognize that different doesn't mean wrong, and that the measure of good parenting isn't perfect adherence to arbitrary schedules, but rather the love, values, and character we instill in our children. She returned to her seat amid another round of applause, this one longer and more enthusiastic than before. I sat in my chair, overwhelmed by emotion and barely able to process what had just happened. In the span of 15 minutes, Mrs. Rodriguez had completely transformed the narrative around my family from one of neglect and selfishness to one of strength, compassion, and community service. Sandra Wellington sat at the front table, clearly struggling to regain control of a meeting that had veered far from her intended script. The other PTA officers looked uncertain, waiting for guidance on how to proceed in the face of such a compelling defense of the very parent they had gathered to condemn. Finally, Sandra cleared her throat and attempted to resume her leadership role. Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez, for sharing your perspective on this situation. I think we can all appreciate your dedication to your students and your desire to see the best in every family. But her words felt hollow and defensive after Mrs. Rodriguez's passionate and detailed defense of my character and parenting. However, Sandra continued, trying to regain momentum for her original agenda, we still need to address the practical concerns about aftercare policies and ensure that our programs are sustainable and fair for everyone involved. Before she could continue, another parent stood up. It was Maria Santos, whose daughter Carmen was in Isabella's class. I knew Maria only slightly from brief interactions at school pickup, but she had always been friendly and warm. I'd like to say something, Maria announced, her voice carrying a slight accent that reflected her Mexican heritage. I've been listening to everything that's been said tonight, and I think we're missing something important. Sandra looked annoyed at yet another interruption to her carefully planned presentation, but she couldn't reasonably deny another parent the opportunity to speak. Maria walked toward the front of the room with confidence and determination. My husband is a police officer, she began. He works swing shifts, overtime, holidays, weekends, whatever the department needs to keep our community safe. Sometimes he's late picking up Carmen from aftercare because he's dealing with a domestic violence call or a traffic accident or a burglary. Should my family be excluded from school programs because his job requires him to put public safety ahead of convenience? Her question echoed Mrs. Rodriguez's earlier challenges, and I could see other parents beginning to make connections between my situation and their own family circumstances. What about the Hendersons? Maria continued, gesturing toward a couple sitting near the back of the room. Jim Henderson is a firefighter. Should their kids be penalized when he's late because he's fighting a house fire or rescuing someone from a car accident? She turned to address different sections of the room. What about Dr. Kim, whose medical practice sometimes requires her to stay late with patients? What about Sarah Morrison, whose military husband gets deployed and leaves her managing everything? Alone? What about any of us who might face unexpected challenges that make it difficult to meet every single expectation perfectly? Maria's voice grew more passionate as she continued. Mrs. Rodriguez is right. We're not just talking about pickup times or volunteer schedules. We're talking about what kind of community we want to be. Are we going to support each other through difficulties? Or are we going to judge and exclude anyone whose life doesn't fit into a neat, predictable box? She looked directly at Sandra Wellington. Mrs. Wellington, I respect your dedication to this school and your desire to maintain high standards. But I think we need to ask ourselves whether the standards we're proposing actually serve our children's best interests, or whether they just make things easier for families who happen to have more flexibility and resources. The momentum in the room had completely shifted. What began as a coordinated attack on my parenting had evolved into a broader conversation about community values, family diversity, and mutual support. Parents who had arrived ready to vote for stricter policies were now questioning whether those policies would create the kind of environment they wanted for their own children. Another parent stood up, then another, each sharing their own experiences of needing flexibility and understanding from their community. Stories emerged of job loss, family illness, military deployment, elderly parent care, and other life circumstances that had required adaptations and support from others. As I listened to these stories, I realized that my situation wasn't unique or unusual. Many families in our community faced similar challenges in balancing work demands with parenting responsibilities. The difference was that my challenges had been made visible and public, while others had managed to navigate their difficulties more privately. But Mrs. Rodriguez's defense had done more than just protect my family from unfair treatment. It had opened a conversation about how we could better support all families facing various challenges, and it had reminded everyone present that the goal of parenting and community involvement should be raising healthy, happy, compassionate children, rather than meeting arbitrary standards of perfection. The meeting continued for another hour, but the tone had completely changed. Instead of discussing punitive policies and exclusionary measures, parents began brainstorming ways to create more flexibility and support within existing programs. Suggestions emerged for carpooling networks, emergency backup childcare, parent, expertise sharing, and other initiatives that would strengthen the community rather than divide it. As the meeting finally concluded, I was surrounded by parents offering apologies for their earlier judgments, sharing their own struggles with work-life balance, and expressing admiration for both my profession and my parenting. The transformation was remarkable and deeply moving. But the most meaningful moment came when Sandra Wellington approached me as I was gathering my things to leave. "Jessica," she said quietly, her earlier defensiveness replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. "I owe you an apology. I let my own anxieties about maintaining school standards cloud my judgment about your situation and your character. Mrs. Rodriguez helped me see that supporting families doesn't mean lowering standards. It means recognizing that strength and dedication come in many forms." I was surprised by her apparent sincerity and her willingness to admit error in front of other parents who were still lingering nearby. "Thank you, Sandra," I replied. "I appreciate you saying that. I hope we can work together to create policies that support all kinds of families while maintaining the high standards that make this school special." She nodded, looking relieved that I was willing to accept her apology and move forward constructively. As I walked out of the school that night, I felt lighter than I had in months. The weight of judgment and criticism that had been crushing my spirit was finally lifted, replaced by a sense of community support and understanding that I hadn't expected to find. But more than anything, I was filled with gratitude for Mrs. Rodriguez, who had seen the truth about my family when others saw only surface-level problems, and who had been willing to speak up when it mattered most. Her courage and advocacy had not only protected my family, but had also transformed an entire community conversation about what it means to support each other through life's challenges. The drive home gave me time to process everything that had happened and to think about how I would explain this evening to Isabella, who was spending the night at her beloved neighbor Maria Gonzalez's house, unaware of the battle that had been fought and won on her behalf. The drive home from the school that night felt surreal, as if I were floating between two different versions of my life, The one where I had been branded a negligent mother, and the one where I had been publicly recognized as a dedicated parent, raising an exceptional child. The streetlights blurred past my windshield as I processed the magnitude of what Mrs. Rodriguez had done for my family, and I found myself pulling over in an empty parking lot just to sit with the overwhelming emotions washing over me. For months, I had been carrying the weight of constant judgment, second-guessing every decision I made, and wondering if maybe Sandra Wellington and the other parents were right about my priorities. The whispered conversations, the meaningful looks, the passive-aggressive emails had all chipped away at my confidence until I began to question the very foundation of my identity as a mother. But in one powerful 15-minute defense, Mrs. Rodriguez had not only validated my parenting, but had revealed truths about Isabella and our family that I hadn't even fully recognized myself. As I sat in my car, I called Maria Gonzalez to check on Isabella and to let her know that I would be picking her up in the morning rather than tonight. Maria's warm voice immediately filled me with comfort, as it always did. "Mija, how did the meeting go?" she asked, using the same endearment for me that I used with Isabella. At 73, Maria had become the grandmother figure that Isabella had been missing since my own mother lived so far away in Florida. It was incredible, Maria. I can't even begin to explain what happened, but Mrs. Rodriguez stood up for us in a way that completely changed everything. "That doesn't surprise me one bit," Maria replied with satisfaction in her voice. "That woman sees everything. She knows exactly who you are and what kind of mother you are to that beautiful girl." Isabella is sound asleep, by the way, after spending 2 hours telling me about a science project they're working on in class. That child's mind never stops working. After hanging up with Maria, I drove the remaining few blocks to our apartment, but instead of going inside immediately, I found myself sitting on the small patio outside our front door, looking up at the desert stars and reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this moment. When Carlos left us 3 years ago, I had felt like my world was ending. Not because I was heartbroken, our marriage had been struggling for months, but because I suddenly faced the terrifying reality of being solely responsible for Isabella's future. I remember sitting in this same spot that first night after he left, holding a sleeping Isabella in my arms and making promises to her and to myself about the life we would build together. I promised her that she would never doubt my love for her. I promised that she would have opportunities to grow and learn and become whoever she was meant to be. I promised that our circumstances would not define our possibilities. And tonight, listening to Mrs. Rodriguez describe the confident, compassionate, academically successful child Isabella had become, I realized that somehow, despite all the challenges and uncertainties, I had kept those promises. The next morning, I woke up early and drove to Maria's house to pick up Isabella before school. When I walked into Maria's cozy kitchen, I found Isabella sitting at the small round table, already dressed for school and working on her math homework while eating one of Maria's famous breakfast burritos. "Mommy!" she exclaimed, jumping up, to hug me with the enthusiasm that never failed to fill my heart with joy. Maria made me eggs with cheese just the way I like them, and she helped me practice my spelling words. "Did you know that neighborhood has 8 letters?" "It sure does, Mija," I replied, holding her close and breathing in the sweet scent of her shampoo. "Did you have a good time with Maria last night?" "The best time. We watched a movie about a girl who becomes a doctor and saves people, just like you do. Maria said that when she was little, she wanted to be a nurse too, but her family didn't have money for school. But she said she's proud that I have a mommy who got to follow her dreams and help people." I looked over at Maria, who was wiping down the counter with a knowing smile on her face. This remarkable woman had been providing Isabella with roots and wisdom while I focused on giving her wings and opportunities. The partnership between us had created a support system that allowed Isabella to thrive even when my work schedule was demanding. As we drove to school that morning, I decided it was time to tell Isabella about the previous night's meeting, though I wasn't sure how to explain the adult politics and prejudices that had created the situation in the first place. "Isabella, I want to talk to you about something important," I began as we stopped at a red light near the school. "Last night, there was a meeting at your school where some parents were discussing rules about pickup times and after-school care." Isabella looked at me with curiosity, but no apparent concern. "Did they talk about me?" "They talked about our family, yes. Some parents had questions about the times when I'm a few minutes late picking you up because of emergencies at the hospital." Isabella nodded matter-of-factly. "Like when that little boy came in after he fell off his bike and you had to help fix his broken arm?" "Exactly like that. But Mrs. Rodriguez stood up and told everyone what a wonderful student you are and how proud she is to be your teacher." Isabella's face lit up with pure joy. "She said nice things about me? What did she say?" As I recounted some of Mrs. Rodriguez's comments about Isabella's kindness, academic performance, and the way she shared her snacks with classmates who needed extra food, I watched my daughter's confidence grow before my eyes. She had been carrying the weight of other people's whispered criticisms without me even realizing it, and hearing that her teacher saw her as exceptional was healing something inside her that I hadn't even known was wounded. "Mommy," Isabella said as we pulled into the school parking lot, "I'm glad Mrs. Rodriguez told them the truth about us. Sometimes I worry that people think you don't love me because you work so much, but I know that's not true. You work because you love me." Her simple, clear understanding of our situation brought tears to my eyes. At 8 years old, Isabella had grasped something that some adults couldn't seem to comprehend, that love and sacrifice often look like hard work rather than constant availability. The day at the hospital felt different somehow, as if the weight I had been carrying for months had finally been lifted from my shoulders. My colleagues noticed the change in my demeanor immediately. "You look like a different person today," observed Dr. Sarah Chen, the emergency room physician I worked with most frequently. "Something good must have happened." I found myself sharing the story of the previous night's meeting with several of my coworkers, and their reactions reinforced what Mrs. Rodriguez had helped me understand about the value and importance of the work we do. These were people who understood the impossible choices that healthcare workers face daily, the weight of responsibility we carry, and the sacrifice required to serve others in life-and-death situations. "Jessica, you're one of the most dedicated nurses I've ever worked with," Dr. Chen said after hearing about Sandra Wellington's accusations. "The number of times you've stayed late to comfort a patient's family or help train new staff, that's not someone who puts career ahead of family. That's someone who brings the values of compassion and service that she's learned as a mother into her professional life." Her words helped me see my situation from a completely different perspective. Rather than being a mother whose career interfered with her parenting, I was a parent whose experience of motherhood made her better at caring for other people's children and families. The love I felt for Isabella translated into deeper empathy for every scared child who came through our emergency room doors. The protective instincts I had developed as a single mother helped me advocate more effectively for vulnerable patients who couldn't speak for themselves. That afternoon, as I was preparing to leave work for Isabella's pickup, I received an unexpected phone call from Principal Davis. "Mrs. Martinez, I hope you don't mind me calling you at work," she began. "I wanted to follow up on last night's meeting and discuss some developments that have emerged from that conversation." My heart rate immediately accelerated, wondering if there had been some kind of backlash, or if Sandra Wellington had found a way to continue her campaign against my family, despite Mrs. Rodriguez's defense. "I've been fielding phone calls all day from parents who attended last night's meeting," Principal Davis continued. "But they haven't been complaints about your family or requests for policy changes. Instead, they've been offers of support and suggestions for ways we can better serve all families in our school community." She went on to explain that several parents had contacted her about creating a network of backup childcare support for families whose work involved emergency services or unpredictable schedules. Others had offered to share professional expertise with the school, including medical knowledge, legal advice, and other specialized skills that could benefit the entire community. Mrs. Rodriguez's comments last night seemed to have inspired a broader conversation about how we can be more inclusive and supportive as a school community, Principal Davis explained. I wanted you to know that the outcome of last night's meeting wasn't just a defense of your family, it was a catalyst for positive changes that will benefit many families. This news filled me with a sense of purpose and connection that I hadn't expected. Instead of being an isolated case of a problematic parent, my situation had become an opportunity for the entire school community to examine their values and find ways to better support each other. When I arrived at aftercare that afternoon, I was greeted by Mrs. Rodriguez with a warm smile and a gentle hug, something that would have been unthinkable just 24 hours earlier when I had been dreading every interaction with school staff. "How are you feeling today?" she asked with genuine concern. "Grateful," I replied honestly. "More grateful than I can possibly express. What you did last night, it changed everything for my family." Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head modestly. "I simply told the truth about what I observe every day. Isabella is a remarkable child, and remarkable children don't develop in a vacuum. They're the product of love, dedication, and strong values, all of which are clearly present in your home." She walked with me toward where Isabella was working, on a puzzle with several other children, and I could see immediately that something had shifted in the social dynamics. The other children were interacting with Isabella more naturally, and she seemed more relaxed and confident than she had been in weeks. "The other children have been asking me about different careers today," Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned as we watched Isabella help a younger student with a difficult puzzle piece. "Several of them are now very interested in healthcare professions after hearing about the important work you do. Isabella has been sharing stories about how you help people, and it's inspiring other children to think about ways they might serve their community when they grow up." This comment struck me as particularly meaningful because it highlighted something I had been struggling with throughout this entire ordeal. I had been so focused on defending my right to work and parent simultaneously that I hadn't considered how my career choices might actually be providing Isabella with positive role modeling about service, dedication, and using your abilities to help others. Isabella looked up and saw me approaching, and her face broke into the radiant smile that always reminded me why every sacrifice was worth it. "Mommy, come see the puzzle we're making. It's a picture of a hospital, and I told everyone about how you work in the emergency room and help people who are hurt or sick." As I knelt down to admire their puzzle, I was surrounded by a group of curious 8-year-olds asking questions about medical procedures, hospital equipment, and what it takes to become a nurse. Their enthusiasm and interest made me realize that Isabella had been sharing stories about my work with pride rather than embarrassment, and that her classmates were genuinely fascinated by the idea of careers that involve helping others in crisis situations. One little boy named Marcus looked up at me with wide eyes. "Mrs. Martinez, Isabella says you once helped save a baby who stopped breathing. Is that really true?" I glanced at Mrs. Rodriguez, who nodded encouragingly, then sat down cross-legged, on the floor to be at the children's eye level. "It is true, Marcus. Sometimes babies and children come to the hospital when they're very sick or hurt, and all the doctors and nurses work together like a team to help them get better. It's one of the best parts of my job, knowing that the work I do helps children like you stay healthy and safe." The questions continued for several more minutes, with children asking about everything from ambulances to stethoscopes to whether I ever got scared when helping people who were badly hurt. Their curiosity and respect for the work I do provided a completely different perspective on the career that had been characterized as selfish and neglectful just 24 hours earlier. As we finally gathered Isabella's belongings and prepared to leave, Mrs. Rodriguez handed me a small envelope. "This came for you today," she said with a mysterious smile. "It's from another parent in our school community." Inside the envelope, was a handwritten note from Dr. Patricia Kim, whose daughter Emma was in Isabella's class. Dr. Kim ran a family practice clinic and had apparently been inspired by the previous night's discussion to reach out with a proposal. "Dear Jessica," the note read, "I was deeply moved by Mrs. Rodriguez's comments about your family last night, and I've been thinking about ways we might support each other as working mothers in healthcare. I would love to explore the possibility of creating a mutual support network for parents whose medical careers create scheduling challenges. Perhaps we could coordinate backup childcare, share on-call responsibilities, or simply provide encouragement to each other when the demands of our profession feel overwhelming. If you're interested in discussing this further, please call me at your convenience." The note included Dr. Kim's personal phone number and email address, along with a postscript that read, "Isabella is a wonderful child who clearly reflects the love and values you've instilled in her. Our community is lucky to have families like yours." As Isabella and I walked to our car, I felt overwhelmed by the rapid transformation that had occurred in our lives. In less than 24 hours, we had gone from being judged and potentially excluded from school programs to being celebrated and offered support by other families facing similar challenges. But perhaps most importantly, I realized that Mrs. Rodriguez's defense had given me something I hadn't even known I was missing: permission to be proud of the choices I had made and the life I had built for Isabella and myself. That evening, as I was preparing dinner, Isabella sat at our small kitchen table working on homework and chattering about her day. The normalcy of the scene, the sound of onions sizzling in the pan, Isabella's pencil scratching against paper, the desert sunset streaming through our window, felt precious in a way it hadn't before. "Mommy," Isabella said without looking up from her math worksheet, "I want to be a nurse like you when I grow up." This wasn't the first time she had expressed interest in healthcare, but tonight her declaration carried a different weight. "What makes you want to be a nurse, mija?" She looked up thoughtfully. "Because nurses help people when they're scared and hurt, and they make families feel better. Plus, Mrs. Rodriguez says that when you love your job, it doesn't feel like work, and you love helping people so much." Her simple wisdom reminded me of something I had lost sight of during the difficult months of criticism and self-doubt. I hadn't chosen my career despite being a mother. I had chosen it because being a mother had taught me about unconditional love, fierce protection, and the willingness to sacrifice for others' well-being. The skills and instincts that made me a good parent also made me a better nurse, and the compassion I developed as a healthcare worker made me more patient and understanding as a mother. After Isabella went to bed that night, I found myself sitting at my laptop, inspired to write a letter to Mrs. Rodriguez that could adequately express my gratitude for her extraordinary advocacy. But as I stared at the blank screen, I realized that no words could capture the magnitude of what she had done for my family. Instead, I found myself writing something different, a reflection on the lessons I had learned from this experience and the insights I wanted to share with other parents who might be facing similar challenges. I wrote about the danger of allowing others to define your worth as a parent, based on narrow criteria that don't account for the complexity of modern family life. I wrote about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who see your whole story rather than just the parts that are visible to casual observers. I wrote about the strength that can be found in unexpected places, in the kindness of elderly neighbors, in the advocacy of dedicated teachers, and in the wisdom of children who understand love in its purest form. Most importantly, I wrote about the realization that being a good parent doesn't require perfection. It requires presence, consistency, and the willingness to put your child's well-being above your own comfort. It requires teaching your children values that will serve them throughout their lives, not just behaviors that will make your parenting look good to outside observers. As I saved the document on my computer, I wasn't sure what I would do with these reflections. But writing them had helped me process the emotional journey of the past few months and clarify the lessons I wanted Isabella to learn from our experience. The next few weeks brought a series of positive developments that reinforced the transformation that had begun with Mrs. Rodriguez's defense. Dr. Kim and I did indeed create a support network for healthcare parents, which quickly expanded to include other families whose careers involved unpredictable schedules or emergency response duties. The group began meeting monthly, sharing resources and providing backup support for each other's children during work conflicts. Isabella's social relationships improved dramatically as the whispered criticisms and uncomfortable dynamics faded away. She began receiving more birthday party invitations, playdate requests, and inclusion in the casual social activities that make childhood joyful and memorable. But perhaps most significantly, I noticed changes in my own confidence and self-perception. I stopped apologizing for my work schedule or making excuses for the choices I had made as a single mother. I began participating more actively in school activities when my schedule permitted, not because I felt obligated to prove my dedication, but because I genuinely wanted to contribute to Isabella's educational community. The culmination of this transformation came about 6 weeks after the infamous PTA meeting, when I received a phone call from Sandra Wellington that I never could have anticipated. "Jessica, I hope you have a few minutes to talk," she began, her voice carrying none of the authority and condescension that had characterized our previous interactions. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since that night at the school, and I have a proposition that I'd like to discuss with you." She went on to explain that the PTA was planning a special event focused on celebrating the diverse career paths represented by parents in the school community, with the goal of exposing children to various professional possibilities and highlighting the different ways that parents contribute to society. "I would be honored if you would consider being one of our featured speakers," Sandra said. "I think the children and other parents would benefit tremendously from hearing about your work in emergency medicine and how you balance the demands of healthcare with motherhood." The irony of this request was not lost on me. The same woman, who had tried to have me excluded from school programs, was now asking me to be a featured speaker at a school event. But rather than feeling vindictive or skeptical, I found myself genuinely touched by her willingness to acknowledge her previous mistakes and work toward creating a more inclusive community. "I would be happy to participate, Sandra," I replied. "I think it's wonderful that the school is recognizing the diverse contributions that different families make to our community." The Career Day event, held on a sunny Saturday morning in the school gymnasium, exceeded everyone's expectations. Parents representing dozens of different professions, from teachers and accountants to firefighters and small business owners, shared their experiences with groups of fascinated children. The energy in the room was electric as kids discovered new possibilities for their futures and gained deeper appreciation for the work their parents did every day. When it was my turn to speak, I found myself standing in front of about 30 children, including Isabella, who was sitting in the front row with a proud smile that could have powered the entire school. I began by asking the children what they thought nurses do at hospitals, and their answers ranged from give shots to wear white clothes to help doctors. As I expanded their understanding of the nursing profession, explaining how nurses advocate for patients, provide emotional support to families, and often serve as the primary caregivers during medical crises, I could see their perception of healthcare work becoming more complex and interesting. But the most meaningful part of my presentation came when a little girl named Sophie raised her hand and asked, "Mrs. Martinez, do you ever get sad when you have to work late and miss time with Isabella?" The question caught me off guard with its directness and insight, but I realized it was an opportunity to share one of the most important lessons I had learned throughout this entire experience. "That's a really thoughtful question, Sophie," I replied. "Yes, sometimes I do feel sad when work keeps me away from Isabella longer than I planned. But I've learned that there are different ways to show love for your children. Sometimes love looks like being home every single day at exactly the same time. But sometimes love looks like working hard to provide opportunities for your child, or using your skills to help other people's children when they're hurt or scared. I looked directly at Isabella as I continued. What matters most is that children know they are loved, supported, and valued. Isabella knows that even when my work schedule is demanding, she is the most important person in my world, and everything I do is motivated by my love for her. The children nodded solemnly, and I could see that this concept of different expressions of love resonated with many of them who had their own experiences with parents whose careers required sacrifice and flexibility. After the presentation, as families were mingling and children were excitedly discussing what they had learned, Mrs. Rodriguez approached me with tears in her eyes. "Jessica, that was beautiful," she said, giving me a warm hug. "You've come so far from that scared, defensive mother I saw in the PTA meeting just a few weeks ago. Look at you now, confident, articulate, proud of who you are and what you've accomplished." Her observation made me realize how profoundly the experience had changed me. I had discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, found my voice in situations where I had previously been silent, and learned to advocate not just for my own family, but for other families facing similar challenges. As Isabella and I drove home from the Career Day event, she was bubbling with excitement about all the different jobs she had learned about and the possibilities for her own future. We understand things that other kids might not understand, and we can help each other feel proud instead of different. Her natural leadership and the organic formation of this peer support group reminded me that children often have wisdom and resilience that adults underestimate. Isabella had not only survived our difficult experience, but had developed skills and perspectives that were now helping other children navigate similar challenges. As the new school year began, I settled into my role as Healthcare Heroes Program Coordinator with a sense of purpose and fulfillment that I had never experienced in any previous job. The work combined my clinical expertise, my passion for education, and my commitment to supporting families facing challenges similar to those we had overcome. My new schedule allowed me to be present for Isabella's morning routine and to pick her up from school most days at the regular time, eliminating the scheduling conflicts that had created so much controversy the previous year. But more importantly, the work itself felt like a natural extension of the values and lessons that had emerged from our difficult experience. Each week, I facilitated workshops for parents on topics ranging from childhood injury prevention to managing work-related stress to building supportive community networks. I also worked directly with children in school settings, teaching basic health and safety concepts, while also addressing broader themes about family diversity, career exploration, and community service. One of the most successful components of the program was a monthly Career Heroes presentation series where children could meet professionals from various fields and learn about the different ways people contribute to their communities. These presentations were designed not just to provide career education, but to help children understand and appreciate the diverse work that their parents and other family members do. Isabella often served as my unofficial assistant during these presentations, helping to set up materials, introducing speakers, and facilitating discussions with other children. Her involvement in the program had given her additional confidence and leadership experience that was evident in all areas of her life. 3 months into the school year, I received a letter that brought tears to my eyes and validated every choice I had made over the past year. It was from a mother named Angela Rivera, whose husband was a firefighter and who had been struggling with criticism from other parents in their school community about his irregular schedule and her need to work evening shifts as a hospital technician. "Dear Jessica," the letter read, "I attended your presentation about supporting working families last month, and I wanted you to know how much it meant to my family. For the past 2 years, I have felt like a failure as a mother because other parents at my son's school made comments about how often my husband misses school events due to his firefighting schedule, and how I sometimes have to arrange alternative pickup because of my hospital shifts. After hearing your story and participating in your workshop, I realized that I had been allowing other people's limited understanding of our situation to make me feel ashamed of choices that I should be proud of. My husband risks his life to protect our community, and I provide essential medical support that helps save lives. These aren't career choices that should require apology or justification. My 8-year-old son Miguel has also benefited tremendously from the program. He participated in one of your school presentations, where children talked about their parents' careers. And for the first time, he spoke with pride about his father's work instead of apologizing for the challenges it creates. He came home that day excited to tell me about all the different types of hero jobs that help keep communities safe and healthy. I wanted you to know that your program has given my family something we didn't even realize we were missing: permission to be proud of who we are and what we contribute to our community, even when our circumstances don't match traditional expectations. Angela's letter was one of dozens I received that year from families who had found support, validation, and practical assistance through the Healthcare Heroes program. Each story reinforced my understanding of how widespread these challenges were and how much impact could be achieved by creating spaces for families to connect, share resources, and advocate for each other. As the school year progressed, the program continued to evolve and expand. We added components focused on mental health awareness, financial planning for irregular income families, and advocacy skills for parents who needed to navigate school systems or workplace policies that didn't accommodate their unique circumstances. Isabella continued to thrive in this environment, developing skills in public speaking, peer mediation, and community organizing that seemed far beyond her 9 years. She had transformed from a child who was beginning to question her worth based on other people's judgments to a confident young leader who actively worked to support other children facing similar challenges. The program also had unexpected personal benefits for me. Working in community education and family advocacy felt like a perfect synthesis of my healthcare background, my experience as a single mother, and my passion for creating positive change. I was using my professional skills while also addressing the broader social issues that had affected my own family so profoundly. One evening in late spring, as Isabella and I were reviewing her homework and I was preparing materials for the next day's parent workshop, she looked up from her math problems with a thoughtful expression. "Mom, do you remember when those parents said you were a bad mother because you work at the hospital?" The question caught me off guard, not because she had never mentioned the PTA meeting controversy, but because it had been months since she had brought it up in conversation. "Yes, I remember that, Mija. Why are you thinking about it?" "I was thinking about how different things are now," she said, setting down her pencil and giving me her full attention. "Now when you talk to parents about working and taking care of kids, they listen to you like you're really smart and helpful. And when I tell kids at school about your job, they think it's really cool instead of thinking there's something wrong with our family." Her observation highlighted something I had been gradually recognizing, but hadn't fully articulated. Our difficult experience had not only been survived, but had been transformed into a source of strength, wisdom, and service to others. "You're right that things are very different now," I replied. "What do you think changed?" Isabella considered the question seriously, as she always did when we discussed important topics. "I think people understand us better now because you help them understand us. And I think we're stronger now because we learned that some people might not understand us at first, but that doesn't mean we should change who we are or feel bad about our family." Her analysis was remarkably sophisticated and accurate. We had indeed learned to advocate for ourselves and for others facing similar challenges. We had found our voices and our confidence. And we had discovered that our story could help other families navigate their own difficult experiences. "Isabella, you've grown so much this year," I told her. "Not just taller, but wiser and stronger and more confident. I'm incredibly proud of who you're becoming." She smiled with the quiet satisfaction of a child who knows she has overcome significant challenges and emerged stronger on the other side. As we continued our evening routine, finishing homework, preparing for the next day, reading together before bedtime, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this point. A year earlier, I had been a defensive, exhausted, single mother feeling judged and isolated by my community. Isabella had been a confused, hurt child beginning to question whether her mother's love was adequate or her family was acceptable. Now, I was a confident advocate and educator helping other families navigate similar challenges while continuing to serve my community through meaningful work. Isabella was a young leader actively working to create more inclusive and supportive environments for other children facing family circumstances that didn't match traditional expectations. Our story had become bigger than just our personal experience. It had become a catalyst for community conversations about inclusion, support, and the diverse ways that families can thrive. It had inspired programmatic changes that would benefit countless other families facing similar challenges. And it had demonstrated that even the most painful experiences can be transformed into sources of strength, wisdom, and service when approached with courage, resilience, and commitment to growth. As I tucked Isabella into bed that night and kissed her forehead, she looked up at me with eyes full of love and confidence. "Mom, I'm glad we went through all that hard stuff last year," she said, "because now we get to help other families, and that feels really good."